to finish up our little history lesson, Kissinger started using grain as military aid under Public Law 480. Countries that were supportive of the United States would receive the grain, but countries that were not were punished. And so, in 1974, food aid to South Vietnam was $270 million. But Congress cut aid by 20%. That's because Nixon was very unpopular. He was in the process of being impeached. And because the war was growing very unpopular. It was up till Afghanistan. It was the longest war in U.S. history. So the White House increased the PL 480, the food aid, to $499 million. And so Congress added a provision that 70% of food aid be given to countries on the UN's seriously affected list. Kissinger tried to get South Vietnam on the list, but it failed. And so the White House went around Congress and they upped PL 480 from $1 billion to $1.6 billion. They could use countries like chess pieces on a geopolitical chessboard. And Kissinger created into military aid. Just like in Chile, they had a socialist government which temporarily took over the country. They were not a pro-U.S. government, so Kissinger directly ordered the aid be cut off. But when the United States backed a dictatorship, and that dictatorship was in power, they gave the PL 480, the grain, back to that country. The way Kissinger had so much power is because he set up back channels. Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger would not even use their own State Departments. They would work around their own departments, work around Congress, work around everybody, have back channels directly set up with these countries. And that's kind of the way they went about it. That's why Richard Nixon, when he was really unpopular, no one really came to bat for him, because he basically worked around everybody in order to get his foreign policy goals done. Now, let's get into the current circumstance that we're in. The first question is about grain. What is grain? How important is it? Who controls the grain supply and who owns these companies? Now, the reason I'm telling you this out loud is because the real people that control wealth is not paper rectangles that are printed backed up by nothing. They own resources like oil, military weapons, defense industries, grain. You look at the companies that control those resources and who owns those companies, then you can see who really owns the wealth. I want you to start doing this. That way we can have a more informed public. Grain is the harvested seed of grasses such as wheat, oats, rice, and corn. Around the globe, grains are also called cereals, are the most important staple food. Humans get an average of 48% of their calories or food energy from grains. Grains are also used to feed livestock and to manufacture some cooking oils, fuels, cosmetics, and alcohols. Almost half of the grains grown around the world are harvested for people to eat directly. People turn wheat flour into bread, steam rice, and make corn tortillas. Grains are a food staple in almost every culture on earth. A food staple is food that is eaten frequently, often at every meal. Staple foods can be eaten fresh or stored for use all year. Rice, corn, and wheat are the most common staple foods on earth. Grains are important because they are a good source of important nutrients called carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a type of sugar that provide energy for organisms to function. Your body produces sugar called glucose, and that glucose helps oxygen and nutrients move through your body. And without that sugar, which your body produces naturally, you would not be alive. You would not have energy to function. Grains also have other important nutrients as well as vitamins. A third of the world's grain supply is fed to animals. Most domestic animals, from cattle to dogs, are fed food and grains and grain products. So there are 5 companies that control the world's grain trade. The first is Archer Daniels Midland. They are based in the US. They are also in 75 countries. They run 265 processing plants. You also have Bunge. They employ 35,000 people in 40 countries. You have Cargill, is in the United States. They employ 142,000 people in 65 countries. Now, Cargill is pretty interesting because they also supply McDonald's, Coca-Cola, all these other companies. Nestle, these mega corporations rely on the grain from that company. The next one is Glencore International. Now, something interesting was this company was founded by Mark Rich. For those of you unfamiliar with Mark Rich was a convicted felon for tax evasion. He was pardoned the last day in office by Bill Clinton. Even Chris Matthews, who was a huge supporter of Bill Clinton, stated that it was a mistake. But Mark Rich founded Glencore International. And Mark Rich was a criminal and a convicted felon. But they control 1/10 of the grain market. That's 1 in 10 grain sales all go towards products from this company. Think about that. All these things are interconnected. Louis Dreyfus, French company founded in 1851, now operates in more than 50 countries, transports 70 million tons of food a year. So there you go. In the next video, we will get into the seed industry.